A fair few years ago, I was working as a subcontractor for an electric power company. I heard a creepy story during my time there, and I want to share it here. In order to avoid any legal troubles, I will just keep a few details to myself. Let me just explain a couple of things as a prerequisite to this story. There are tons of electrical distribution units in substations which power the electric to all homes. These substations are usually unmanned. Plus, these buildings' interiors are bare bones, undressed concrete. Some of the ones I visited were between 30 and 40 years old. Because they're unmanned, they get dirty easily, and the inside is almost always dark and empty. This gives them the appearance of the abandoned hospitals in the Silent Hill games. It's heck of creepy, especially the substations which take you deep underground. You're down there alone, and it's almost as if you feel like you should have a weapon. It's not as if you get a feeling like something's down there with you, or an atmosphere about the place. They're just really creepy buildings. There's nothing to be afraid of down there, but whenever I had to work alone, I was always pretty scared. So one night I was out drinking with a co-worker, and I was thinking of those underground substations. I asked if there was any scary stories or an experience that he has heard of happening down there. And that's where I heard this story. At one underground substation in a major urban area, there is a day known as Death Day. On Death Day, no one is permitted to be down there for any reason except for emergency work, such as power failure. The reason for this is because there have been many strange accidents said to have occurred on the anniversary of Death Day. Fatal accidents, which in their very nature were highly unusual. I didn't know when the death day was or who passed away. It was all very hush-hush. He told me that only some of the older employees knew, and they weren't telling. It was very weird, but I guess it helped in a way explain some of the weird goings-on and things that spooked me. There was activity in that substation. I remember a lot happening. Like I said, we often had to work alone down there, and one of the things that used to happen when I was in that particular substation was the elevator kept moving through the floors, even though no one was there to call it. I always thought it was something that the elevator did by itself to keep it operational. I guess that was kind of dumb of me. The substation I worked at is still active to this day, and it was only after I worked a little higher up in the company I found out a little more about Death Day. The plant rules about working there on Death Day are still in place even now. I'm glad I found out about Death Day later, otherwise I would have been jumping at each little noise and light flicker in the building. It was a really weird experience for me thinking back on those times. I was working down there alone, in the dark. Oh, I didn't even tell you about the specific incident. An employee was alone down there, in the substation, doing some work on a communication line. It was pretty routine stuff. Somehow the poor guy ended up touching a high-voltage transformer and suffered death by electrocution. Other accidents occurred on the stone stairs. There have been countless slips, trips, and falls down there. Some have been fatal. I work for a construction site, and something strange happened during a demolition. I have been on some pretty dangerous jobs, and some downright crap jobs. I could share a few experiences, but nothing tops this one. I was sent out to demolish an old house in a suburban neighborhood. It seems as if the house was some kind of company dormitory or something. Based on this, the tenants would change every year or so. It was a pretty small place, 1 kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a bathroom and a lounge. It seems as if there was a basement there at one point too. It was a renovated property. I didn't expect the job to take a whole lot of time. The furniture was already moved out ahead of my arrival. On first inspection, the job looked a little easier than described. Also, the pay for the work required seemed too high, but who was I to complain? There were some rules though. The interior must be stripped, including all the flooring before working on the exterior. I was told that someone would turn up during the demolition, and I was to give them free rein over the house, and I was told not to bother them with small talk or questions. Finally, I was asked not to reveal to anyone whatever happened during the demolition. During my work, a man showed up with someone from our company. He looked to be in his 30s. He was thin and fair-skinned. He didn't look like someone who worked in the construction industry. He showed up in a station wagon, and he was carrying an overnight bag. He appeared to refuse a helmet. Weird. So we started work. Some of my team started taking up the flooring and dismantling the underflooring and stacking it outside. We were doing as the instructions stated. The man in his 30s quietly watched from the entrance as not to get in the way. We changed rooms. When we changed rooms, he opened his overnight bag and removed some objects. He took out a face mask, a bottle of cloudy white-looking liquid, and some unusual tool I hadn't ever seen before. It had a handle in the middle, and it had two pointed ends which appeared to be made of gold. I was about to use the crowbar to remove the flooring in the next room. The floorboards were much thicker in that room, but the room seemed the newest. I was working one of the corners, and a younger employee of our company was working one of the other corners. My concentration was broken by his shouting, "What the hell is all this?" The man came rushing over from the doorway, and quickly bent down by the side of him. Beneath the floorboards, the young worker had found a skull. The skull appeared to belong to an animal, not a person. He carefully used the shovel to dig around it and attempt to remove it, but to all our surprise, he found a full skeleton down there. The lengths of some of the bones must have been up to a meter long. We were thinking that someone must have buried a dog there, but we couldn't be sure. The bones seemed to belong to some kind of animal I couldn't even imagine. We didn't really get a good look at them, since we were told to get them removed pretty quickly by the man without the helmet. All the bones were scooped up and put into a black bag and then taken away. It was pretty weird, but we kept on working. I was looking forward to getting paid. Once the bones in the flooring were removed, the man came over to us and said he had a couple more requests for us. There should be a small incense burner in the ceiling above where the bones were found. I want that to be disposed of too. I'm going to get some charcoal from the car. And when I come back with it, I want you to bury the bones, the incense burner, and the charcoal. They should be buried where demolition has been concluded. At the demolition site, on leveled ground, okay? He said it to us so businesslike, like it wasn't weird at all. But it clearly was. Anyway, we did as he asked, since he was paying. I found the incense burner in the spot he said it would be in. I thought that it looked pretty expensive. It could have been an antique. I thought about taking it for myself and just telling him I buried it. But then something in my mind persuaded me not to. Something had been going on here, and I didn't want to be part of it. After I clocked off, we removed all the wood and metal from the attic. And then the heavy machinery was brought in to level the hollowed out house. Before we got to demolish it, the man went back in with his overnight bag, waving around that weird golden tool and squirting that liquid. We buried the stuff we were told to bury, and then we went on our way. This isn't where it ends though. There are 2 follow-up little additions which might be of interest. After work was concluded, I couldn't stop thinking about how weird it was, and I was obsessed with finding out more information about that house. I looked online through many news articles and forums. I probably shouldn't have done that, but my curiosity got the best of me. So it turns out that the house was used as a company dorm for employees of a very big household name company. I cannot share that name with you. I'd really like to, but I can't. I don't think it's a good idea. Anyways, it was a company dorm, but the weird thing was, they had another company dorm on the other side of town. A much more modern one, in a much more convenient location. I found out that the people who lived in the weird house I worked on were always young employees with new families. Rumor has it that within 2 to 3 years of living in that house, some kind of terrible incident happened to them. Someone in their family passed away, for example. It wasn't ever by accident, suicide or illness. It was by something else. It was like they suddenly ceased to exist. They just dropped down dead. There was also an incident where a small child was rumored to be killed by a truck. It made me think of all those bones, and although I'm pretty sure they weren't human, I'm not 100% sure. So that freaked me out. The other incident happened about 3 years ago. I went to a conservative candidate selection, and I happened to meet someone from that very demolition job, the man who didn't wear a helmet. It seemed as if he was working for the conservative candidate, as his secretary or something. He looked a little shocked to see me, but then he smiled and we spoke with one another, and it went a little bit like this. Thanks for your help. I'm glad to see that you're in great health. That's a relief. You did get rid of the things I told you to get rid of, right? Especially that incense burner. Yep, good, yep, thanks. Strange job, but it needed to be done, it really did. It's important to do the work honestly, right? No cutting corners. So I'm glad you did what I requested. If you had done it wrong, then... hey, who knows? We might not be here today. Especially me. He seemed to be a little frightened by something, and he was clearly deliberately choosing his words as if he was being listened in on. Call me paranoid, but that's how it felt. And then, without skipping a beat, it was as if all the emotion ran out of his face. He turned to me, dead-eyed, and said, "By the way, thanks for your vote." I'll never forget that look. I think that there are areas in the world we shouldn't know about. Stuff is going on behind the scenes. I heard this story from a co-worker. He told me this about 10 years ago. He said that it took place in his 20s, and he was 60 when he told me this, so let me just do some quick maths here. It happened around 50 years ago. Hope that's right. He was working for a construction company at the time, and he was trying to climb the ladder at work. He was eager to take on any duties from his bosses and supervisors. He was on a job in Kyushu, deep in the mountains, in a remote village. The work was going to be noisy and dusty and in close proximity to the villagers' homes, so he was asked to go door to door to inform them of the construction work that was about to commence. So he goes around the houses. They're all dotted all over the village. He walks up to one, and the door was already open. It looked like the door had never been shut. He called out to the occupants at the threshold of the property. He heard a reply come from somewhere inside the house. The owner of the house seemed pretty pleasant, and my colleague was asked to wait by the door. The house was a very old wooden construction, and there even was a dirt floor at the entrance. From that dirt floor, you would step up into the home. My colleague was waiting there. There was a knee-high step made out of dirt covered by a woven straw cover. He was stood on that step. Suddenly, he felt something move beneath his feet. He looked down and noticed that there was an iron gate in the floor inside the house. He looked down through the grate, but he couldn't see anything but darkness. Based on the movement he felt, based on the movement he felt, he guessed that the family who lived there must have kept dogs. He thought that it was a bit weird to have the grate beneath the house though. Why not let the dogs run free? While he was waiting for the owner to come downstairs, he decided to take a closer look at that grate. He wanted to see what was down there. When he peered into that grate, he caught eyes with a dirt-covered young woman. He was incredibly shocked to see this. The young woman had her eyes fixed on him. My colleague's knees gave way. The owner of the house came downstairs after hearing the commotion and asked what had happened. He kept his cool, and he calmly explained what he was there to explain about the commencement of construction in the area, and he left. He said that when he gave it a little more thought, he was sure that the girl he had seen had some sort of mental challenges, although the way he worded it wasn't as PC. I guess that because they live in a rural area, they had no choice but to keep her somewhere. The structure he described sounded like some kind of basement. The whole incident gave him really weird vibes, and he described it as something he would never forget. He said that he still remembers the location for that village he was called out to. He even tried to look it up, the exact place on Google Maps to show me, but I couldn't see much apart from mountains, trees, and a few houses. I asked him if he thought that the house could still be there, and he replied with a smile, "Who knows, huh?" I'm shocked. Disgusted he didn't report what he saw. I feel for that girl. That's no way to treat someone. I'm gonna keep the details of where this happened private, out of respect to the people who still live there, in that building. I feel for those people. This happened about 3 years ago. I was asked to help plan a new retirement home. The location of the retirement home would be in the city next to the one I was living in. At the time I was asked, I was working in a different city, a long way away from where I was living, and driving to and from work took up a lot of my free time. So to work in the next city over seemed like a smart idea. I accepted. I was asked to attend a planning meeting at the site, so I drove to the location. It was only about a 15-minute drive from my place. The location was amazing, but there was one thing that was a little odd. It was only 300 meters or so from a large cemetery. So I imagined that whoever lived in that retirement home, in an apartment which faced the cemetery, wouldn't have the best of views. Plus, they would have the constant reminder that death is just around the corner, literally. Maybe that's just me being morbid, but there was literally nothing else nearby the proposed retirement home site. The meeting went well, and I was excited to get to work. Before leaving, I saw an older man passing by. He seemed to be interested in our meeting. I decided to go over and say hi. I asked him if he was out on a walk, and he shook his head to indicate no, and then he asked me, "What will be built here?" I told him that a retirement home would be built here, and then I pointed out the coming soon signs that were being set up. The old man then said, "I thought this place would be a nice and quiet place to spend the rest of my life." And when I heard that, I felt as if he could have been being a little sarcastic, so I replied with something along the lines of, "Well, it might not be the best location on Earth." He kind of faked a laugh and then walked off. Planning was complete, and the date of digging the foundations had approached. There were 2 workers there when I arrived at the site, and it was as if they had been waiting for my arrival. I knew one of them, but I didn't know the other. We greeted one another, and the guy I hadn't met before looked a little nervous. After a brief discussion, we began the excavations. We had been excavating the ground for about 3 hours until the excavator suddenly stopped. The driver got out and went to inspect. I was curious too, so I kept a watchful eye on him. I found out that the caterpillar tread had stopped working, rendering the machine static. The driver got out and went to check, and as he was passing under the bucket, it dropped on top of him. The sound of impact was horrifying. The bucket should have been static and incapable of falling like that, but it did. I shouted to the other nearby operator to pull up the bucket as I raced over. Luckily, the operator only suffered some deep bruising to his left arm. He was putting on a brave face, and to me it appeared as if he was hiding the extent of his pain, so I insisted that he got his arm looked at. He said the reason that he got out of the excavator so quickly was because he thought he saw the shadow of a person heading towards the excavation site. But when he was beneath the bucket, it was as if the person he thought he had seen vanished into thin air. He was apologizing over and over again and telling me how crazy it sounded. I told him that there was no need to apologize, and we went to the hospital together. Once he was x-rayed and no fractures or breaks in his arm were discovered, we headed back to site. He wanted to come back with me. When we got back to site, we saw that work appeared to have stopped. I went over and asked what the holdup was. I was informed that the excavation continued in the area the accident took place in until something was discovered. I looked towards the area he pointed at, and I saw something that looked to me like an old pot lying on the fresh dark soil. "What's that?" I asked. "We're pretty sure that there are some bones in there. In all likelihood it's an urn, as there appears to be some ashes." I was naturally taken aback, and then I asked, "Did you find any others down there?" I knew that this could only halt the progress of construction, and that would be a big problem. "We only found this urn," he replied. That relieved me. Judging by the look of the urn, it was really old. So that made me think that we weren't looking at some kind of unsolved crime or anything. Uncovering something like that in disused land didn't seem that groundbreaking. To be honest, getting rid of it was at the forefront of my mind. It was only going to push back progress. I needed this job to go well, as it was a great opportunity to get myself out there. If we had uncovered some ancient relics, some pieces of history, or dare I say more bones, then we would have stopped digging instantly. But for a one-off, I'm not sure it warrants it. Either way, I had to report my findings to the director. I told him my stance, and like me, he suggested that we move the urn and rebury it a good 10 meters away from our excavation site. We removed the urn, cleaned it, and reburied it. One of the workers suggested that we should light some incense sticks and lay some flowers. I said we didn't really have time for any of that. After that incident, construction progressed at a steady pace. We completed the ground floor before we knew it. But then, strange things began to happen. Accidents on the job became commonplace in certain areas. Workers lost fingers, broke bones, took heavy falls, and suffered lacerations by building materials falling on them. In 1 month, our construction site suffered 11 injuries. Thankfully, none were fatal. It wasn't long before some of my colleagues on site started to wonder if it was all due to us moving those bones in the urn that we dug up. I would be lying to you if I told you that I didn't believe in that possibility. Word reached the director's ears, and all of a sudden we were told that we would have a day off. The site was covered in a blue kind of tarp so outsiders couldn't look inwards. I didn't put up a fuss. I had a paid day off, and the cherry on top would be news of no more work-related accidents. I'm not sure what he organized there, but our situation improved. When we went back to work, we found that the number of accidents had decreased, but they didn't go away. It was so weird that they seemed to happen in the same area of the site. I started to get concerned about what might happen in this building once construction was complete. I worried for the residents, which would come here to retire. A few days went by, and during that time I continued to think about the incidents. One evening I got a call from my colleague. He was the guy who had the bucket of the excavator drop on him, back when we were digging the foundations. When I heard it was him on the other end of the phone, I felt a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach. He asked if we could meet, and I agreed. When I saw him, he looked pale. I asked him what happened. He said that he had been feeling off ever since the accidents started happening. I told him that it was natural and not to worry because the job would be over before he knew it. He said that he had been having trouble sleeping. I didn't start having the nightmares right away, but recently I've been having them every night. It's always the same dream too. Interesting, I thought. He elaborated on his recurrent dream. In my dream I see this man. He's the same one I saw at the construction site. You're in my dream too. The old man is always clinging to you, like he's always watching and waiting. He's attached to you. I found this amusing, so I said to him, "Why me?" "I don't know," he said back to me. I thought that he must be here for some kind of reason, so I waited for him to reveal it. And after a momentary pause, he came out with it. "Look, I came here tonight to see if we could, go back to the site and light a couple of incense sticks and maybe say a prayer." I guessed that my colleague was more religious than I thought. He had been in a pretty frightening accident too. I'm not cruel enough to shut down a request like that. If all it took from my part to end his bad dreams was another trip to site, then who was I to refuse? I decided that there was no time like the present, and I told him that if we left now, we could make it to site by about 6 p.m. It should be pretty quiet, and none of our colleagues would see us doing our kind of ritual thing. We set off, and in the car I asked him a little more about the old man in his dreams, and he told me about his appearance. From the way he described the man, he sounded an awful lot like the old man who asked me about construction on the first day I went to site. He was able to describe him very well, down to his haircut. He said that he could do it because he had seen the guy so many times. I started to get a little creeped out when he said that. I decided to change the subject. The atmosphere was getting a little heavy and oppressive. We arrived at site. It was almost completely constructed. We headed towards the corner we originally found the buried urn. It was going to be a bathroom on the first floor. As I stood in the near-complete bathroom, I couldn't help but think we should have left that urn where we found it. And while I was thinking those thoughts, I looked around the bathroom. Then from outside I heard my colleague call my name. I turned to leave, and I found myself stuck. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt something like sleep paralysis, yet I was still awake. Essentially, I couldn't move. I collapsed to the ground, and I couldn't find my feet again. As I hit the ground, a large stepladder began to topple. It fell and crashed onto my back. I was unable to get out of its path. Thankfully, it didn't hurt that much, but it really did startle me. At that point, my colleague came into the room and said to me, "Let's go light those incense sticks." I was able to get to my feet again, and I was ready to get out of that room. We burned our incense sticks, prayed, and left the scene. In the car on the way home, my colleague turned to me and said, "I'm sorry, you wouldn't have got hurt if I didn't ask you to come out to the site tonight." I told him not to worry. I found myself laughing and smiling about the situation before we even got back. My colleague brought the mood crashing down when he said that he believed that something was still angry at me. He urged me to stay away from the site. I listened. I managed to spend the rest of the job either stood outside or in my office looking at drawings and pictures. I didn't set foot inside that building again until it was complete. In total, there was 29 accidents on that site, and 28 came from the area we found the urn. That area is now a bathroom, and I wonder how many more accidents will occur there. I also wonder, what would happen if someone decides to build something next to the retirement home? Only those who worked on that construction site know about the urn. It was a weird experience, and I haven't been back to that place.